Section 5.3 continues as we practice solving quadratic equations by factoring. This is the second of the three ways that we're going to talk about. And this is actually going to wrap up section 5.3. But again, I'm going to review with you. A quadratic function written in standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c. Get used to it. It's the most popular form of a quadratic. And as I just told you in the last video, anytime you solve a quadratic equation, it has to equal 0. We must always make equal to 0. So, we're going to practice solving by factoring. Problem number 1, solve x squared plus 2x equals 3. First thing I notice, highest power of x is a 2. That means at most 2 solutions. Secondly, I have to make it equal to 0. Well, here's my balance scale line. I need to get that 3 over here and make it equal to 0. So I'm going to minus 3 to both sides. And then I'm going to write it in descending powers of my variable. The x squared term first, the x to the first term second, and the minus 3 at the end. And now it equals 0. I can now solve my problem. Now, we reviewed the skill of factoring for just this purpose. So what we need to do now is we need to factor x squared plus 2x minus 3. Well, the a value is 1, so therefore we know that this is x and x. This sign is a minus, which means they're opposite signs. And 3, the only numbers multiplied together to give you 3 is 3 times 1. Well, since this is a positive, I know the 3 has to go with the positive sign and the 1 has to go here. So that double check, there's negative 1x, check my rainbow, positive 3x, and together that makes negative 2x, and I've got my factors. Now I'm going to back up and do a little bit of erasing here. I'm going to put this back in here, but I need to erase this because our problem equals 0. So step number 1 is to factor. Now, step number 2. In order to solve, we need to set each factor equal to 0. I have 2 factors. I'm underlining both of them. I'm going to take that factor and make it equal to 0. And I'm going to take that factor and make it equal to 0. And that is where our 2 solutions will come from. Since it's times, if either one of these is 0, we all know 0 times 0 equals 0. So that's what we want. So I'm just going to solve this. I'm going to add 1 to both sides, and I get x equals 1. And over here, I'm going to minus 3 to both sides, and I get x equals negative 3. And these 2 are my solutions. And by the way, if this problem looks familiar to you, it's the same exact one that I did for you on the last video for graphing. And if you remember right, these were the 2 x-intercepts. These are the same as the x-intercepts on the graph. So people, you get the same answer either way, either by factoring or by graphing. Let's look at another one. Example number 2. 3x squared plus 12x equals 0. Now, I neglected on the last problem to remind you of this when you factor, the first rule of factoring. Well, it's already equal to 0. So, I need to factor this. But if you recall from my factoring videos, the first rule is to pull out the common term. Now, on the last problem, there wasn't a common term, but there is this time. And if you look at the terms, you notice the coefficients are 3 and 12. Well, obviously, they're both divisible by 3. And if you notice, both terms have an x in them. This side has 2, and that has 1. I'm going to pull out an x. Well, what's left? 3x squared divided by 3x leaves x. 12x divided by 3x leaves plus 4. Now, if I would redistribute, 3x times x is 3x squared, and 3x times 4 is 12x. It should work the same forward and backward. Now, again, I'm going to do a little bit of an erasing here. But I have my factors. And again, it's equal to 0. So I have to add that part. So I pulled out the common term. I factored it. Now, if you notice, what I'm underlining in green, the highest power of x is 1. You can't do any more factoring. Your factoring is done. Here's my first factor. Here's my second factor. So as I did on the last problem, set your factors equal to 0. There's the first one, because here's the times sign right there. So 3x equals 0. And here's my second factor, x plus 4 equals 0. Now if I solve these, here I'm going to divide by 3, so I get x equals 0. And here I'm going to minus 4 to both sides, and I get x equals negative 4. These are the solutions to my problem. Or if you want to call them roots, or if you want to call them zeros, or if you want to call them x-intercepts. Remember, all those words mean the same thing. Now I can check this. I can put 0 back into my original problem. If I put 0 in and square it, that's 0. 0 times 3 is 0. And if I put a 0 there, 12 times 0 is 0. 0 plus 0 equals 0. It works. And the same thing would work as if I put a negative 4 in there. So, highest power is squared. I have two answers. X is 0. X is negative 4. Last problem. Example number 3. 4x squared equals negative 22x plus 42. Uh-oh. I've got a problem. It's not equal to 0. Therefore, I'm going to have to add 22x to both sides, and I'm going to have to minus 42 to both sides. These will cancel out, and now I'll have 0 over here. And then I'm going to write it in descending powers. 4x squared plus 22x minus 42. Step 1. Is there a common term? Well, yeah, because 4, 22, and 42 are all divisible by 2. So I'm going to pull a 2 out front. If I divide that by 2, I get 2x squared. If I divide that by 2, I get 11x. And if I divide that by 2, I get negative 21. And of course, it equals 0. So now I got to factor it. The 2, as I taught you in an earlier video, that stays with the problem. Now, 2x squared. The only thing 2 multiplies is 2 times 1. So I'm going to put 2x and x. Now the signs, the last sign's negative, which means they're opposite signs. So I don't know which one goes where because of this 2. Now 21 is 1 times 21 or 3 times 7, and I'm betting it's 3 times 7. Now the key is I got to get 11x in the middle. Well, upon close inspection, if I put the 7 here and the 3 there, and if I make this a positive and this is a negative, that should probably work. Because negative 3 times x is negative 3x, and 7 times 2x is 14x. 14 minus 3 is 11x, and I get my answer. So, I have my factors. This whole row are my factors. Now, I've actually got 3 of them. Now, again, this is equal. I'm going to erase this. This is equal to 0. So the next step is to set all your factors equal to 0. Well, my first factor is 2. There's my times sign. So there's my first factor. So I make 2 equal to 0. But does that make any sense? No. That's impossible. So therefore, we're going to ignore that. I'm going to set that factor, 2x minus 3 equal to 0. And then I'm going to set that factor, x plus 7 equal to 0. And I solve these. Now I'm going to do this one first. This one's easier. Minus 7 to both sides, you get x equals negative 7. This one, you guys, there are 2 steps to solving this one. The first thing, you add 3 to both sides. Well, I get 2x equals 3, but I got to solve for x, so I got to divide by 2, which makes x equal to 3/2. And there are the 2 solutions to my original problem, which I'm putting a box around. If you would plug 1.5 or negative 7 in for the x's, you would find out that this problem works out. And that is how you solve equations, quadratic equations, by factoring.